This is a video showing the replacement of your torsion spring on your garage door. The first step in doing this is to make sure that you observe all safety precautions. Make sure you have the proper equipment, wearing safety glasses, and as you're replacing the spring or winding or unwinding the spring, make sure that your body and face are clear of the spring and the bars using to adjust it, so you don't get hit or injured in some way. So the first step in doing this is to obtain a new spring. So to figure out what kind of spring you need to make measurements on the existing spring. Now in some cases there are two springs. My door happens to have a single spring. So the critical thing here is determining whether it's a left wound or a right wound spring. So looking at this spring, if you come up and take a look at it, right here, this spring happens to be a left wound spring. And so you can see this is the end of the spring that actually rotates. And so you can see how the spring terminates at that point. So once you determine that, the next step is to determine, you basically need three measurements. You need the wire size, you need the inside diameter of the spring, and you need the length of the spring. Now when you make these measurements, you want to make the measurements of the spring in the relaxed state. So that would be the case where either the spring is already broken or the tension is off the spring, which would be in the condition with the garage door up. So the way you would measure the wire size of the spring is the best way to do that is to take a span of 10 turns and 20 turns and measure the distance and then divide by the number of turns. The next step is to measure the inside diameter. I found that with a spring that was not broken, this was really difficult to do. So what I actually did is I measured the outside diameter and I subtracted 2 times the actual size of the spring coil to get the inside diameter. And then finally, the simplest measurement is just to measure the length of the spring from end to end. So once you have these measurements, then you can order your new spring. So once you have the new spring, the first step is going to be to unwind the existing spring if it's not broken, or if it's broken, you can delete this step. So what I have here is I ordered with a spring these bars which allow you to unwind it. So currently it's set up so that the bar is resting against this block. And so make sure that you have the direction of the unwind correct so that you're securing the bar before you actually release these 2 bolts up here, which will allow the entire spring to turn. So at this point now I'm going to start the unwinding process. So to unwind it, you use these 2 bars and you just take one out and then let the other one rest against a block like that. Insert the next one and let this one relax all the way against the block, and then you just continue doing this until the tension of the spring is totally relaxed. So the way to get the spring off is to, at the 2 ends where the pulleys are, loosen the 2 set screws on each pulley at each end. And then what you can do is slide the bar and then remove the pulley on the end that you want to pull the spring off. And so you can see that I have that done now. So the next step is to put the new spring on where the old spring was. So after removing the old spring, put the new spring on the bar, basically reversing the process used to remove the spring. So this shows the new spring installed, and when you put the pulley back on, make sure you get the sense of the winding correct. So before you actually start the job, take a good look at the pulley and make sure you see which side of the pulley the cable is coming off of. So here I have the whole thing reassembled, and so the final step is to wind up the spring and then see how much tension is on it and make any adjustment so that the weight of the door is properly supported. Now, what I also want to do is show you a close-up of the end of the windings. So this is the end of the old spring. And so you can see this is the end that you unwind, and so you can see the sense of the winding. So this particular spring is a left-hand wind. So it's really critical that you make note of this before you order your new spring. Before you tighten the set screws on the pulleys and start winding the spring, you want to make sure that the rod doesn't turn, because as you tighten the spring, there's a tendency for the rod to rotate, which is going to screw up the winding on the pulley. So what I've done here is I put a vice grip on the end of the rod. And I did at the end where any burrs won't be a concern, because the pipe will never slide from that point through a pulley or any kind of a bearing. So there's a vice grip on there, and then the vice grip is secured with a clamp. So once you do this, there's no concern about the tension on the cable changing as you start to tighten the spring. So the torsion spring is all wound up, and I made about maybe 2 extra rotations of the spring from what I did to unwind the old one. So that might be a good guideline. So when you unwind it, you want to make count of how many unwinds you do. The other thing is, before you test the door, take the clamp off the end of the rod, and obviously disconnect the linkage to the garage door opener so you can test it. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to test the garage door and see what kind of level I get. The garage door, and there should be more weight on it, maybe just a little bit to allow it to go down. And then your garage door opener only has to support that much weight. So that's it. Job is done.